Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Let's start on the labor front. After 20 hours of negotiating, the culinary union, they have announced a tentative agreement. They are moving towards a 5-year contract with the casinos in Las Vegas. So the 35,000 workers that were, maybe going to go on strike, no. I guess 10,000 hospitality workers at 9 of the properties. Well, look here. This is good news. Also, good news. It appears the SAG-AFTRA strike is also over. They have come to a tentative agreement. Again, strikes work, and the threat of strikes work as well. I'm looking at some of the things. It looks like the main issues have been addressed, and look, the workers came out on the positive side of this. So good for them. Now, on the electoral side, I'm sure everyone paid attention to the big election. A big blue wave. I mean, you kind of got to look at it and see what it is. Big blue wave. And really the death of polling. I think polling should now be, maybe we don't talk about polls ever again, other than just the topics that they're talking about. Now, Rick Santorum, the former Republican vice presidential candidate, senator, congressman from Pennsylvania, he kind of said, well, we Republicans lost because, the very sexy issue. His words, very sexy. Can you imagine very sexy coming out of Santorum's mouth? Anyway, an issue like abortion to him, very sexy. He said that it's evidence that pure democracies are not the way to run a country. Yeah. He said, that's why, thank goodness, that most of the states in this country don't allow you to put everything on the ballot, because pure democracies are not the way to run a country. You gonna let that sink in for a minute? Now remember, this is the Republican former presidential candidate, ultra conservative. This is Rick Santorum saying, we don't want people to decide what happens in a country run by we the people. Can't have that. No. A little sore over the abortion issue because look, Republicans haven't figured out what to do. I think they were as shocked by the overturning of Roe as everyone else was, because I had predicted with Trump's Supreme Court nominees that they would maybe move in a slower kind of, it'd be the death of 1,000 paper cuts. They would allow, certain things, the heartbeat bill, they'd allow, a whole bunch of restrictions until where it was legal, but really hard to do. They didn't do that. The dog caught the car and chewed right through the back seat. And Republicans are taking a beating for it. In fact, so much of a beating that Glenn Youngkin is not going to run for president. Because understand, Youngkin had his pathway to the White House all in line, and it's the abortion issue. Because he was going to come out as the more moderate candidate. He was going to come out with the guy with the plan. We're going to have a 15-week abortion ban, which is basically what the extreme was before the Supreme Court overturned Roe. But that was going to be now taken as the moderate position. See how far the goalposts have been moved? But fortunately, the good folks of Virginia threw some Republicans out. Democrats now control both the Senate and the House, which means Youngkin's going to have to figure out how to deal with a real moderation and a Democratic legislature, which means his talking point is now gone. And this got me thinking today, because I look at Ohio, where Ohio went constitutional right to abortion and legalization of pot. And it got me thinking about what my right-wing friends love to claim Democrats do. They always want to take your guns. And yet I've yet to see that, but that's the belief. And when you take rights away from people, people get upset. And it's something Republicans used to understand. It's what they ran on. They're going to take your liberty. They're going to take your freedom. They're going to take your guns. And yet, when they took a woman's right to choose away, I don't think they thought that people would be upset. And look, you can be against abortion and still go, no, I don't want government in my life. I don't want government in my bedroom. I certainly don't want a Republican congressman making decisions for my wife, my daughters. No. And oddly enough, that seems to be the sentiment that, get out of my life. But here we are, the big blue wave. You got a Democrat elected in Kentucky on the abortion issue and on infrastructure. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of really good stuff that have come out of this. And it's because, one, I think Biden has done a good job of just doing the work, hasn't gotten involved in all of the debating and all of the mudslinging. But that the idea that getting things done and seeing how crazy the Republicans have been, the fact that they're the do-nothings, well, that's not true. They do a lot. They destroy stuff. I think for some that has been an awakening moment. Now, on the local level, where a lot of these elections were, my school board, for instance, I feared greatly would go crazy, would go toward the maniacs with misery because they had a lot of money. There were signs everywhere, big, giant, massive signs. Those are about $100 and some a piece. So they got money from somewhere. I'm kind of interested to find out where. Is it from the billionaire Jeffrey Yaz and the Maniacs for Misery, Moms for Liberty groups, and all the people who are funding that? We may find out. But I was concerned. And I was concerned about a lot of local school boards and a lot of the things that I feared were going to happen. And fortunately, people saw through it. And this, again, is why elections matter. This is why we do want to have democracy where people have the vote. Rick Santorum. I just find it amazing. But again, here we are. And the message, I think, for Republicans should be, one, you've really screwed yourself over the abortion thing really badly. And you better figure out how to walk that back. But two, all of this dysfunction has made voters a little leery of you. And maybe you should do something. Maybe something positive. Maybe get back into the legislative process and figure out how to make lives better. Because people are upset about inflation. How are you going to help fight inflation? What's your model legislation? What's the messaging you're coming out with? Well, today they showed us what they are going to do going forward. They've heard you, America, and they are listening loud and clear. They got the message. They took the shellacking at the polls, and now they have heard you. And what did they do today? Well, Georgia Republican Mike Collins put forth an effort to defund the office of the vice president. That's right, we're going to defund Kamala Harris, which you go, oh, what? 106 Republicans voted for it. So, now, it clearly didn't pass, but you still had 106 Republicans who voted to defund the vice president's office. This is the kind of nonsense and ridiculous. Oh, if only I were rich and I could afford the FCC fines. This is one of those things where you clearly you didn't get the message, because here we are 9 days away from a potential government shutdown, and Republicans still no plan. So you took a shellacking at the polls. You've been chaotic in the House for the last several months, and still no idea how to stop the train from derailing in 9 days. Now, of course, they're saying, well, we're going to have this laddered CR, or we're going to... No, because Democrats have already said they're only going to accept a clean funding bill. No gimmicks. No, hey, we're going to shut down, the department that issues, EBT cards and SNAP benefits. We're not going to. It's crazy where we are. And the hope is that the Republican Party wakes up from the shellacking they took on Tuesday, because their message was kind of extreme, kind of out there. But we'll see. And this is where the amazing part in all this comes. I was so happy to see that most school boards in my state of Pennsylvania didn't lose their minds. That people still believe in public education, still believe that government can and should do things. And for me, that's the message I'm taking. Now, what does this mean for 2024? It means Republicans have a problem on the abortion issue that they don't know how to solve because their rabid base, the extreme of their base won't allow them to walk it back. And also, look, would you believe the Republicans at this point if they then did say, oh, well, we didn't really mean to outlaw Roe completely. We like Youngkin's trying to do, well, the 15-week thing. As I've been saying, Republicans lie a little differently today. You used to have something you could believe in. Now, they just seem like lies. It just seems like we're just making stuff up, pulling stuff out of, well, reaching back and popping out a golden nugget. And I think voters have had enough of it, or at least I hope. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I got a lot to get to, a lot to talk about. Back after this. Stick around.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425. Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So we shall see what lessons are learned. There are a lot of hot takes out there today, and the one thing that I get from hot takes is most of them are wrong. Just like the polling that we see every day. The Kentucky race was neck and neck. Wasn't even close. Again, I hope we wake up from this. Let's go to the phones. Got Steve in Chicago on line one. Steve, how are you?
Yes, I'm fine, and I had a few takeaways as well, and I'm glad that you brought up the whole issue of things like school boards. Sometimes we sort of forget, we get caught up in the whole national election cycle. Who's winning in the Senate, the House, who's ahead in terms of the White House a year out. While at the same time, things are going on in our local school boards and city councils and other places, and that's where a lot of the government, that really impacts your lives takes place. Now, that's where a lot of the decisions get made. So I'm glad that you're talking about it because, quite frankly, give credit where credit's due. The Republicans did a good job over 30, 40 years of cultivating, grassroots efforts at that level. And that's where a lot of these people came from who are now in high office. They started at that local level, having been cultivated by the Republican Party and running for places like school boards and so on. And council persons and aldermen and then mayors and on up the road. So, yeah, I mean, it's important. Get out there, get involved, because those things don't run themselves. So when you're wondering why your child can't read XYZ books, well, it's because you didn't pay attention to what was going on in their school.
No, excellent point. And the thing is, and I want to focus on what you just said a second ago. The reality is the Republicans have built the infrastructure to do all this stuff. There's a lot of billionaire money that went into these school board races. There's a lot of these think tank groups who have facilitated trainings and organizing that the left just for some reason doesn't do at the same level or doesn't think is as important.
No, and you're absolutely right. And then moving on to how we did yesterday, it's absolutely true that yes, I mean you had some people who made some sort of common sense decisions. In Ohio, you had independent and Republican, especially women, especially white women, who said, okay, this needs to be enshrined in law. Now, make no mistake, given the margins as far as 2016 and 2020 in Ohio, Ohio is no longer a swing state.
No.
It's probably going to be definitively red for a while. So, let's not sort of get ahead of ourselves thinking that this somehow means that, Ohio is going to be in play. Same thing with regard to Kentucky. Trust me, Kentucky is a red state in 2024 when it comes to the presidential election. So the question is, it's sort of like a double-edged sword. In many ways, I'm happy about the fact that we're enshrining a lot of protections for women, but at the same time, we're taking that issue off the board in many of these states. So therefore, if you are someone, say a Republican, who's concerned about that issue, but your state enshrines it in law, then you can just go back to voting on other Republican issues and say, I'm fine voting for Donald Trump in 2024 because that issue, we've already opted to protect it in Ohio. So now I can vote whichever way I want. And part of the problem with regard to a lot of this stuff has to do with, how we as Democrats are going to present a message with regard to what we're going to do for this country moving forward, and articulate it in a way that people who are in the middle, who are on the left, are energized enough to get out there and vote, because that's the big thing. In 2020, a record number of people turned out to vote in this country, more than at any time since the race in the year 1900, in terms of the percentage of the population that actually voted. So we need people to turn out in those kinds of numbers, because when people turn out in large numbers in this country, it favors Democrats.
Correct.
And that's what we need to do. We need to get people out, we need to get them motivated, and get them to understand exactly what's at stake. The 250th anniversary, you and I are both old enough to just remember when they celebrated the 200th in 1976. And now we're approaching the 250th anniversary. A few years ago, you would have told me, I wonder if we're going to make it to that. I would have said, you're crazy. Of course we're going to make it to that. I wonder if Donald Trump is elected again, if we make it to that.
Yeah. No, it's an excellent point.
How do you have a functional democracy with a man who's a convicted felon? Or what happens if he's literally taken into custody on any number of these charges and actually has to do time? What's the Constitution say on that? Can you run a country from prison? What kind of constitutional conflict will there be when the state of Georgia says you need to go to jail for 2 years? Oh wait, but I've got to be at the inauguration next week. No, you go into custody today. Okay, what constitutional crisis that creates? And
it's the it'll be the gray bar office then, no longer the Oval Office. No, we had a presidential candidate run from prison. Yeah, Eugene V. Debs got almost 1 million votes running from prison, back years ago. We'll see where it goes. I do want to get your thought. You said about democracy and making it to 250. Curious your thoughts on Rick Santorum's position that issues like abortion that bring out young voters is evidence that pure democracy is not the way to run a country.
Well, and that's a really deep discussion, because I'm leery of sort of pure democracy. We've had some really bad examples in which we actually had that exercise. Probably the greatest one in the last decade was Brexit. The day after the vote, the British people set out to finally figure out what they were voting on. Yeah. So, yeah, and as a number of people have pointed out, so when you've got something that's so complex, that requires really a technocratic understanding of an issue, it's not the greatest idea to leave it in the hands of Joe Blow. It really does require that people with expertise address it, and that's why we have Republican styles of democracy, in which we hopefully elect people who know a little bit more than we do, and then they have advisors, and they bring in scholars and researchers, and they can inform them, and then they make an informed decision as opposed to leaving it to sort of everyday people. And unfortunately, I have a great love of the American electorate. I don't have a lot of faith in them. And I think the election of Donald Trump demonstrates that. I think that the continued popularity of Donald Trump demonstrates that. And when you ask the people who believe in him, they don't believe in him on things like a marginal tax rate or other things. I'm talking about like the craziness that the Space Force is secretly running the government, and Donald Trump is going to take power from Joe Biden.
Yeah, JFK Jr. is coming back.
Right, and I I'm not for letting these people make public policy decisions through direct democracy. So that's my problem. I think direct democracy can work. One of the other problems with it is that it gives you this dichotomy in which it's an up and down vote on almost everything. When you have a referendum, you either vote for or against. When you have representative democracy, you can find a middle ground. If you say, okay, we want a new school bond, we want $100 million. The other side wants nothing. Okay, we can negotiate. We can settle on 40, 50 million. But when you have the sort of up and down vote, it's okay, either for it or against it. That doesn't leave that much room for negotiation. So, yeah, I mean, like I say, it's a deep discussion that, we really can't resolve in the course of the radio, this hour. But it's one worth having, and it's one that's been going on for many, many centuries. So, but I will say this, that democracy, as far as voters making the decisions, requires a highly educated society, and that requires a huge investment in education. I have far more faith in Europeans making those kinds of decisions than I do in Americans. We have not just an undercurrent of anti-intellectualism in this country, it has turned to an all-out torrent, a hurricane, that's saying to people in the 21st century, you don't need to go to college. It'll damage your children if you send them. Don't pay to be indoctrinated by some crazy socialist professors.
Yeah.
I mean, that's dangerous.
I'm with you on that. I'm with you, Steve. Appreciate the thoughts, though. Thank you, bud.
Take care.
Let's go to Alice on line 2. Alice, how you doing this evening?
Hello.
Hey, what's on your mind?
Well, I was looking at the results for our little county's election, and apparently a majority of the Trump supporters are still drunk. Statewide, I'm serious. It's like the Republicans, they were voting for Republicans all over the state and in the local government. Only 2 of the townships, I'm a borough, and it wasn't ours, trust me, seemed to have voted for Democrats. And 2 of our county commissioners were re-voted in, and both of them are rabid Trump supporters. In fact, the one I threw off of my porch when she first started to run her first term because she was going on and on about, and then she insulted me and called me a Republican. And that did it. I said,
And that was it. That's all it took then. Okay, I got it. I hear you.
Oh, I was insulted. But, I think because our county is still, unfortunately, back in the 17th century, it might take a while.
There you go.
But our school board was sort of, there were some ding-a-lings and then a few sane people. So I don't know. Have a good evening, Rick.
Thanks, Alice. Some ding-a-lings and a few sane people. Yeah, I got to tell you, that's where I'm at as well. But fortunately, the sane people in my school district, they're the ones who prevailed. But not as big as I would have liked, and there's still maybe public education in my area still has a chance. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, by all means. Angry emails always to the top of the list. Miss any portion of the program, make sure you grab the podcast wherever you get your favorite podcast. You will find ours. We'll take a quick break, right back, and talk a little bit more about school boards and big money in the elections and how'd that fare on Tuesday. Back after this. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2009. That was the day more than 5,000 Philadelphia transit workers walked off the job. For 6 days, buses, subways, and trolleys that carried close to 500,000 commuters a day came to a screeching halt. The strike defied then-Governor Ed Rendell's orders for both sides to stay at the bargaining table. The union planned to strike during the World Series, but pushed back the strike date under threat of serious consequences made by the governor. For months, the Southeastern Pennsylvania Transportation Authority, or SEPTA, stalled contract talks. The authority hoped to rip up workers' abilities to choose work assignments based on seniority rights. They also looked to eliminate jobs through speed up. The union was determined to hang tough despite a steady barrage of anti-union commentary in the media. Local editorials smeared workers as ingrates and whined that they weren't sufficiently thankful to simply have a job in such hard economic times. More cynical writers contended that sticking points on healthcare were resolved when SEPTA agreed to cover the cost of Viagra. Authorities, including Philadelphia Mayor Michael Nutter, claimed the union was being unreasonable in the face of such generous terms offered by transit management. But TWU Local 234 successfully defeated the boss's offense to wrestle away benefits and work rule concessions. The union demanded wage increases and limits to employee health care contributions. Irate union members insisted on independent audits to reveal where years of pension money went. They accused SEPTA of raiding the already underfinanced pension fund. The union eventually conceded on pension contributions, but the strike was a victory. TWU members showed that even in difficult times, a successful fight could be waged against cutbacks and hard-won rights.
If you're trying to enact an extremist right-wing policy, but the public keeps rejecting it, what do? You could try blatant deception, giving the same old policy a new coat of paint, a euphemistic name, and a multi-million-dollar political shove. That's the dark path now being taken by the clique of plutocrats and theocrats who are determined to privatize America's public schools. Take Texas Governor Greg Abbott. Please. Joking aside, he's been pushing to make taxpayers fund private schools. But his own right-wing legislature has consistently rejected his power play. After all, even red state Republicans don't want for-profit chains and religious zealots grabbing tax dollars to indoctrinate school children. So this year, Abbott and company rebranded their scheme as, quote, school choice and parental empowerment. Who could be against that? The people, it turns out. While some families might want exclusive private schools, their claim that they have no choice is a fraud. As one GOP legislator put it, his rural county has, quote, private schools, a parochial school, a charter school, and a large homeschool community. That is choice, he rightly notes. Who are the privatizers? National billionaires like the Koch brothers. And in Texas, we have Tim Dunn and Ferris Wilks, two messianic oil billionaires from West Texas who double as proselytizers of a toxic theology of Christian nationalism. They are the money gods of school privatization. Indeed, the governor, more than half of Texas House members, and every Republican state senator are financially hooked on their oil money. This is Jim Hightower saying, no matter what slogan the privatizers masquerade behind, their goal is simply to defund public schools and divert our education dollars from the common good to their corporate and theological academy. Ask yourself, what would Jesus do?
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, Steve Martin, the comedian, evidently wrote a book, a novella called Shop Girl. In fact, it was made into a movie a number of years ago. He was in it, and Clara Danes. Didn't think anything of the book Shop Girl, but evidently one of the more than 300 titles that were removed from Collier County, Florida's school district, Steve Martin has been banned, and I love his response to it. He said that I'm so proud to have my book Shop Girl banned by Collier County, Florida. Now people who want to read it will have to buy a copy. And that, I think, I don't know that that's the right response, but it's a good one. It is a good one, and good on him. But the sad thing is look, you got all these crazy school districts who are banning books left and right. So Tuesday's election, kind of, are we going to tolerate more of that, or are voters going to push back and find some sanity in public education? Well, I know here in Pennsylvania, in a lot of places, my district being one of them, sanity won the day. And here to share some thoughts on how things went out in Bucks County, one of the most watched areas in the country over this period. I've asked Sarah Mikaleko to come talk with us. Sarah is the editor-in-chief at the Bucks County Beacon. You can find their work at buckscountybeacon.com. Sarah, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, thank you, Rick.
So What do you think? They banned Steve Martin's book.
Not surprising. They'll go after anything, including classics like Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five.
Yeah, I've been saying for a while, they've banned my entire high school reading list. Everything I had to read in high school, they've banned. And my first thought was, where were these people when I didn't want to read those books back then?
Of course, yeah. Well, knowledge is subversive, so.
This is true, and I'm grateful to have read them when I did. It helped shape some of my thinkings. But here's the thing, I look at the results from Tuesday's election. I'm not unhappy.
No, absolutely. I mean, here in Bucks County, it's morning again. Democrats really exceeded expectations in local elections. And we saw some really momentous Democratic wins in school boards across the county, places like Central Bucks and Pennridge and Council Rock. And, in Central Bucks, for example, you had these parents and community members in the last year that really took the threat of Moms for Liberty and this kind of extremist anti-public education movement very seriously. They did a lot of the heavy lifting of grassroots community organizing, educating, mobilizing, really democracy building from the bottom up. And that's how you defeat these movements. And that's what led to a sweeping Democratic victory and a new Democratic board majority that was previously controlled by the far right. And, let me tell you something about these parents and community members. They're dragon slayers, right? I mean, they defeated this local MAGA dragon, this multimillionaire and aspiring oligarch, Paul Martino, who dumped about $300,000 of his own cash into the race.
Into a school board race.
A school board race, $300,000, because, he wanted it to, one, buy a seat for his wife, and then two, consolidate this extremist majority with his own hand-picked MAGA, Moms for Liberty backed candidates. And, what this money was used for essentially was a scorched earth campaign, right? So, for example, within those hundreds of thousands of dollars, he dropped $40,000 for seed money for some out-of-state GOP political hack to start a PAC. And this guy, what he does? He tells the Philadelphia Inquirer that his goal is that by the time he's finished with his, toxic mudslinging and disinformation, what I would almost call a psyops campaign on this quaint suburban community, that he wanted these 5 Democratic candidates to be, quote, ashamed to be seen in public. This is for a school board election. And so, it really didn't matter if they burned the community to the ground. All that mattered was they wanted to capture power. But thankfully they lost. And it was because of all these amazing parents and community members, teachers and students, who were putting in the hard work and doing that democracy building. But, sadly, he's not done. He's not, deterred. He said he's already gearing up for 2025. And so he didn't get the message. And, having followed this gentleman for the last couple years, it's not surprising, that his enormous ego isn't going to allow him to learn the lesson that voters tried to teach him, and that's that democracy is not for sale in Central Bucks School District.
Oh, yeah, but what they've also understood over the years, Cyril, is they throw enough money at something, eventually, down the road, eventually they're going to prevail, and that's, you got to give the right credit for spending immeasurable amounts of money to build a state policy network that's second to none. They've got think tanks and front groups and AstroTurf groups, and they've got all of this organized money pushing bad ideas constantly, 24/7, 365, more than any community group could possibly compete with. And yet, as you pointed out, the Dragon Slayers in this moment, they've won, but they know the long game. If they keep pouring money into it, maybe we'll wear down and we'll miss an election.
No, I mean that's a great point. They have been practicing the long game for like the last 5 decades, and like you said, they've kind of like built these institutions and these pipelines, like from the Federalist Society to the Supreme Court or other federal benches. And the left really never, had the foresight or were never able to kind of like build parallel structures.
No, you were right the first time. They never had the foresight.
Yeah.
They just never built the messaging machines. They never built the information machines. They never built any of that infrastructure. And then they're surprised when they get their hats handed to them on messaging, when they're always fighting against right-wing frames and always fighting from behind instead of setting the agenda. I mean, that's been one of those things that has made me crazy, because we've spent all this time and energy on just defending public education instead of figuring out, hey, how can we make it better? How can we take these resources that we're putting into just defending what we have, just holding on to what we have? How can we use this energy to make things better? So even when they lose, they still win because we haven't advanced the ball at all.
Yeah, and hopefully that starts changing, and it needs to change, right? Because the right is this kind of like multifaceted movement, and another part of this like war on public education that we've been reporting on quite a bit is kind of the Christian nationalist element to it, which is kind of not only it's part of the Moms for Liberty movement, but it's its own bigger movement,
Yep.
larger movement, and it's a dominionist movement that seeks to gain power over the 7 mountains or 7 spheres of society, like government, media, entertainment, and education is one of those mountains, and that is a number one target for them. And this is something that we've seen kind of infiltrate school districts here in Bucks County. So in Central Bucks, which we were just talking about, the current school board president, who lost her reelection campaign, thankfully, she admitted to Reuters that she had invited in the Independence Law Center, which is the legal arm of the far-right Christian PA Family Institute, which is the state chapter of Focus on the Family. She invited them in to rewrite school policy, district policy,
Wow.
specifically to make it easier for parents to challenge books and for the district to ban books. And she said, because they were doing it pro bono, she didn't think she needed to tell anyone about it.
Wow. So I guess maybe did they take the Hillsdale curriculum too? I mean, they're giving it away for free. So they doing that?
Well, that I think that's what the fear was. If this MAGA Moms for Liberty slate of candidates were to win, and thankfully they were swept. But I'm glad you mentioned Hillsdale, because that brings us to another really huge race, and really shocking for me at least, which is in Pennridge School District, right? And so that's in definitely a redder part of Bucks County. And this was a district that had a Republican Moms for Liberty, like supermajority, and the lone Democrat was initially elected as a Republican, and his party got so crazy he had to leave and he switched parties. But there in Pennridge, they actually brought in Jordan Adams. He's a Hillsdale College graduate, a former Hillsdale College employee who started his own quote unquote education consultancy company, Vermilion Education. And so Pennridge was the first, and I believe still is the only district in the nation to hire him to rewrite policy. And the Moms for Liberty sect of the all essentially the Republican supermajority of the school board just kind of like pushed this contract through, introduced it the day before. It was like an open-ended contract where essentially he was just, cashing in. And what we saw happen was that he was rewriting policy and incorporating Hillsdale 1776. So Hillsdale 1776 was part of the new social studies curriculum that he helped introduce into the district. And I think a lot of people just got fed up. Like that was just a step too far. And then there was just like infighting within the Republican supermajority of Pennridge, where you had some people that opposed the contract, some Republicans opposed the contract, but only on kind of like really transparency, not necessarily ideology. They're ideologically aligned with this kind of like Christian right wing whitewashing of history, but they just didn't like how the even more extremist Republicans on the school board decided that transparency and accountability weren't something that they wanted to champion and were kind of impediments to their agenda.
Wow.
So there, the Democrats swept as well. And then that just like I would have been happy if the Democrats had gotten a couple seats, but now they're in the majority. So likely Vermillion Education and Jordan Adams, he's going to be looking for another job.
Good.
And again, that's the result of a lot of grassroots Democrats, a lot of community organizing, a lot of knocking on doors and just talking policy, right? It wasn't about kind of like partisanship or mudslinging. It was about saying like, look, this is what's happening in the district. Do you agree with this? And the district came under fire as well because they were shadow banning books. They were pulling books out of the library under the pretense of weeding old and obsolete titles, but all the titles that they happened to be pulling just happened to be titles that Moms for Liberty targeted. What a coincidence. And so a parent, Darren Lawson, he was fed up and he took the district to court. First, he filed RTK requests to get information about what was happening, how these books were being reviewed, which ones were getting pulled. The district stonewalled him. He took him to court. And he wiped the court with them because the judge ruled that the district was acting in bad faith and were engaged in what amounted to a cover-up. And so again, there's just another district in Bucks County that went all blue and was part of this blue wave that we saw sweep through both local government offices like county commissioner, Bucks County County commissioners, and Doylestown Township supervisors, Newtown Township supervisors, and in school districts like Central Bucks, Pennridge, and even Council Rock, where Moms for Liberty weren't really in yet, but they were knocking at the door and they were able to kind of fend them off.
Yeah, no, you're listening to the Rick Smith Show here with Cyril Mikulenko. He's editor-in-chief over at the Bucks County Beacon. You can check out their website, buckscountybeacon.com, for all of the reporting they've done on this and other issues. I saw a tweet, though, that said that anyone who's maybe keeping track of Jeffrey Yaz, the billionaire here in Pennsylvania who spent a lot of money on right-wing politicians and a lot of this attack on education stuff. They said every race that he put money into, they lost, and he spent over $5 million on losing campaigns. That's a good sign. I got to tell you, I'm happy about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. And again, like, we are at a disadvantage because we don't have these kind of like, decades old institutions and, these kind of like millionaires and billionaires kind of like, funding them. But we do have people power. And what we're seeing is like people power, when galvanized, defeat plutocrats. And I would just say like another component of these victories that we're seeing throughout Bucks County, across Pennsylvania, and across the country is due to the role of progressive independent media, like what you're doing with your show, what the Bucks County Beacon's doing, with outlets like the Keystone's doing, because what we're seeing is like local media is just kind of like a rotting corpse right now, and it's just kind of like disintegrating into the dirt. And so, what we have are just like these news deserts, or like communities with newspapers that, are often just mirages because they don't have the capacity to do the depth and breadth of reporting that's necessary in order for you to have like an educated populace that can make, rational and reasonable decisions about elections and democracy.
Well, you guys do an incredible job. I hope folks will take a look at the website, buckscountybeacon.com. We'll get links out on social media. I wish we had an organization like yours in every community across this country. Maybe someday that'll happen. Cyril, I appreciate the time, man. Great stuff.
Thanks so much, Rick.
our good friend Sarah Mikaleku. Make sure you check out Cyril's site. BucksCountyBeacon.com is the website. We'll get links out on social media. You can take a look at that. Quick break, right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1897. That was the day that Dorothy Day, a leader of the Catholic worker movement, was born in Brooklyn, New York. As a young girl, her family moved to San Francisco. Her father lost his job as a sports writer due to the devastating earthquake of 1906, and the family relocated again to Chicago. In 1932, she met Peter Morin, and together they founded the Catholic Worker Movement, a faith-based social justice effort. The Catholic workers opened what they called houses of hospitality to serve those in need. Dorothy helped to co-found The Catholic Worker, a monthly newspaper that became a voice for poor and working people. While writing for the paper, Dorothy traveled and visited with some of the most exploited workers in the country. She talked with migrant agricultural workers in California and was arrested for supporting the United Farm Workers in 1973. In 1940, she visited the Hooverville encampment in Seattle, Washington. Dorothy's reporting vividly demonstrated how her faith informed her activism. She wrote, quote, "The rain poured down. Underneath was mud, ankle deep, and the long lane that cut between the rows of shacks reflected the gray clouds in its pools. But Christ is there. I thought sadly, there in the mud, in the shacks with his poor, with them he is trying to find a place to lay his head. With them he hungers, and with them he suffers fatigue of body and soul. Behold, O God, our Redeemer, and look upon the face of thy Christ. There in the dumps, among the creatures who still are men. Have pity on them and on us who permit such things to be." Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
So I keep hearing about inflation. Inflation's killing us. And look, the reality is, inflation is killing us. Inflation is bad, and it's been bad. And you know what I find interesting is, you know, a lot of my friends are saying, "Well, it's all Joe Biden's fault." And I've been saying for a long time, no, it's corporate America. Corporate America has been screwing us for a very long time. We've been getting the shaft from them for quite some time, and now Pennsylvania Senator Bob Casey has a new report out that points out that inflation rose by 14% from July 2020 to July 2022. During the same period as inflation went up 14%, corporate profits went up by 75% over the same period. You go, how can that be? Well, do you think there's something to that? That as corporate America is lining their pockets and making themselves richer and richer, that it's working people who are the ones who are struggling? Do you think that could have, I don't know, something to do with it? Just kind of throwing that out there. Now, what's interesting is the Federal Reserve found that corporate profits accounted for all of the inflation in the first year, all of it. Every bit of the inflation the first year, that is corporate America. All of it. Did I stutter there at all? Did I? Because again, if you remember, it's all Joe Biden's fault. Joe Biden did this. And you go, no, it wasn't Joe Biden. No. It was corporate America. So that first year, all on them. And in fact, they point out, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the average family spent $61,332 in 2022 to survive, to lead their lives. In 2021, the average family spent $66,928, about a 9.1% increase, an extra almost $5,600 for the year. About $3,200 of that was because of inflation. And all of it had to do with corporate profits. So basically what we did as working people is we just took $32 and handed it over to corporate America. Wasn't that nice of us? And this is where I keep coming back to, okay, yeah, inflation is going up, but there really wasn't a reason for it. And now, the talking point is, well, now wages are keeping up above inflation. And that's true now. But that first year, that robbery year, that year that corporate America said, we got them. We got them. They need our stuff. They got some money that the government gave them. We're getting it. And they did. They stuck it to working people. Another massive redistribution of wealth. That corporate America figured out how to screw over working people. Congratulations. Did a nice job. And now we see the report come out that credit card debt has hit an all-time high. We're over $1 trillion in credit card debt as a nation. They point out that 82% of Americans have credit cards in their wallet, at least one, and a large percentage of them carry balances. In fact, balances over $1,500. And these are people who have carried that balance for at least a year. 11% of cardholders who carried a balance reached or exceeded their limits. And you go, well, that's because they're irresponsible. And you go, no, it's not because they're irresponsible. It's because life's getting a little bit more expensive. Because here's the weird part. This is the weird part. When the stimulus money came out, when the child tax credit money was being doled out, when a little bit of extra help was going to families, they actually paid down their debts. They actually used the money not to go out and consume more, but actually they began to pay for the things that they needed. When we stopped, having people have to pay their student loan debts, they started paying their credit card debts. Who would have known? In fact, they pointed out that because of the pandemic, during that time from April of 2020 to December of 2021, people that carried a balance actually declined from 50% down to 45%. People were paying their bills. Even people with low credit scores. And this is another one of these things where you go, if people have a little bit of resource, they're going to use it the right way. And, I'm watching all of these people, Dave Ramsey, and people are spending money on things they don't need with money they don't have. And you go, no, most people are just putting gas in the car and groceries and food on the table because inflation is real. Wages haven't gone up fast enough. So the lifestyle you had before the pandemic, that's gone. We're just trying to keep up, just trying to keep the head above water. And who's benefiting from it? Again, corporate America. The wealth class of this country always seems to get away with putting their hands in our pocket and taking everything out of it. This is what we should be angry about. This is what we should be furious about. This is what we should be voting on. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com.
Authorities are issuing a stern warning for the bushfire season.
Australia braces for El Nino to intensify already dangerous bushfires this year. October 2023 was the hottest October on record. Plus,
look, guys, we're announcing historic investment in America's railroads. I've been talking about this for a long time, I know. Finally, we're getting it done.
President Biden unveils nation's largest investment in rail infrastructure in 50 years.
All of those stories and other ones that will be ignored by the mainstream corporate media, straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
You know, we may have had a hot summer, but I just went trick-or-treating with my kids, and it was like, you know, the low that evening was 29 degrees.
So climate change is over. Thank God fall is here, Congressman Andy Ogles, Republican from Tennessee. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, don't tell Congressman Ogles about what happened in October. It'll surprise and shock him.
Yes, the Earth just had its hottest October on record by a large margin since record-keeping began in the mid-1800s.
But it was 29 degrees when Andy Ogles went trick-or-treating.
That's according to preliminary data from European forecasters. October 2023 was the 5th month in a row to set a new monthly global heat record, meaning that 2023 is now a lock to finish as the hottest year ever recorded on the planet. Berkeley Earth climate scientist Zeke Hausfather warns that we are still pretty early in the current El Nino cycle, and its full climate warming effects are still yet to come. Global temperatures are likely to hit new records in 2024.
Oy.
In Australia, bushfire season is off to a roaring start, with fire crews battling more than 1,000 destructive wildland fires in Queensland over just the last 2 weeks. Ranchers have been urged to sell their cattle herds because the ongoing bushfire emergency is also exacerbating a national feed shortage.
Wow.
On ABC Australia, Emergency Services Minister Stephen Dawson warned residents that El Nino is going to intensify hot and dry conditions in the already massive bushfire season.
Look, there's no doubt that we are we're having a change in climate, and what we're seeing this year is fires that are earlier. They will be more frequent. We will see a long, hot and dry summer.
Here in the U.S., a new report from the Senate Joint Economic Committee calculates that wildfires exacerbated by man-made climate change cost the U.S. between $400 and $900 billion every year. The comprehensive analysis calculated costs from property damage, economic losses, watershed pollution, and other long-term factors. The Senate committee warns the estimates are likely an undercount of the true total cost of wildfires in the United States.
Oh, I hope Congressman Ogles doesn't hear about that.
Speaking of, in politics, the Republican majority in the U.S. House passed a bill along party lines to slash the budget of the Environmental Protection Agency by nearly 40%, gutting funds for state and local water systems and rescinding parts of the Democrats' landmark climate law that help low-income communities address air and water pollution.
Oh, no. Let's pretend that's actually going to be taken up by the Senate, passed there, and signed by the president.
Well, House Republicans know that the pro-fossil fuel bill won't pass in the U.S. Senate, but they pushed it through anyway. One of 12 must-pass spending bills to avert a government shutdown in a little over a week.
Prepare for government shutdown.
Meanwhile, President Biden on Monday announced $16 billion in new investment in rail transit infrastructure repairs and upgrades, the largest since the creation of Amtrak more than 50 years ago. Funding from the infrastructure law will go to 25 projects along the aging critical commuter network of the Northeast Corridor, the busiest rail line in the United States, to reduce traffic congestion and cut air pollution and carbon emissions that drive global warming.
Fully electrified trains on this corridor emit 83% less greenhouse gases, by the way, than driving your car. It matters. It's like taking 500,000 automobiles off the road every day.
And finally, a very big win in Michigan for things that breathe. Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer is expected to sign sweeping climate and environmental legislation passed by the state legislature's Democratic majority. That includes reaching 100% clean electricity by 2040 and funding to boost electric grid stability, prevent blackouts, and lower energy costs for consumers by expanding cheaper renewable energy. The law also includes critical reforms to the clean energy permitting process to counter the coordinated fossil fuel funded anti-renewable disinformation campaign in rural areas of the state that have been working to block farmers and rural governments from installing renewable energy.
Things that breathe?
Yep.
You mean people that breathe.
Everything that breathes.
For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.brandblog.com.
Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So the other day I got an email from the good folks over at the OPEIU, the Office of Professional Employees International Union, that they were jumping out ahead of the pack, going to endorse Joe Biden for president. And I said, been saying, this is good. We need more of this. But the question, why? Why are you jumping out in the middle of this? Why now? And why did he earn the endorsement? And that's why I've asked Cesar Levion to come talk with us. Cesar is the national political director over there at OPEIU. Cesar, thanks for taking time for us.
Yeah, Rick, thanks for the invitation. I appreciate it.
So let's start right at the beginning. Why? Why are we endorsing Biden?
Well, most importantly, it was a democratic endorsement process that we did. We surveyed our members, and the majority, answered the call and said we need to endorse President Biden for re-election. It's based on his pro-worker policies, really. He's proven that he's committed to those policies that will benefit workers, including investment in infrastructure, as you know, and workplace safety, which is very important to our members, and just his overall track record of supporting labor.
And walk me through some of that support. I mean, look, everyone knows, the president walked on the picket line with the UAW members. He had the message, for the Amazon workers. Walk me through some of the things that you like about the administration.
Yeah, sure. So, well, first of all, we say it over and over and over that this is probably the most pro-labor president that we've seen, right, since FDR. And even FDR wasn't pro-labor in the beginning. He was pushed to be pro-labor. So it's what we've seen with Biden is that anytime we call, he answers, right? Anytime we ask for support or we ask him for a minute of his time, he's always been there, and his whole staff cabinet has been there as well. And what we've seen him push the PRO Act over and over. We've seen him what he's done with raising the minimum wage for federal contractors, supporting unionization overall, support for our striking workers across the country. He's been there for us.
And I got to tell you, I said on day one, he had already done more than most Democratic presidents in my lifetime when he fired the guy at the NLRB, and I'm like, just that was enough for me. But going forward, all the stuff that we've seen come out of the NLRB, for me, that's important stuff. I know it's technical and I know it's hard to understand for a lot of people, but the reason that you vote for a president is who they're going to put into those positions of power that are going to either help or hurt you. And I look at this moment, and all of the advancements that we've seen can be undone by one bad president who will take over in 2025.
Exactly. And as we saw last night with Democratic victories across the country, those elections have consequences, right? And people are shouting, "Look, the effects of the Supreme Court. We're not happy about it, and we're going to show up and let our voices be heard."
So, walk me through some of the hopes that you have for the administration going forward, because a lot of people I talk to say, "Hey, look, there are a lot of things that we want, that we need. How do we get that message out that things are good, and what do you want to see going forward? What more can we be pushing for?"
Well, we take the approach of never stopping our organizing, and when I say organizing, I'm talking about political organizing. We take we take political organizing to a next level at OPIU. We run constant political organizing trainings year round, with an emphasis on building political power for our members. So what does that mean once Joe Biden's reelected? Is that we're going to push like the bonus army did with FDR. We're going to push to hold him accountable to those promises that he promised in 2020 and again in 2024. So I expect more of the same, pro worker policy, building the working class, and just having a open door policy for us to talk about what we need, especially when it comes to contract bargaining and organizing opportunities.
You're listening to the Rick Smith Show with Cesar Levia. He is the National Political Director over at OPEIU, opeiu.org, the website, if you want to take a look at the work that they do. A minute ago, I was just talking about, Senator Casey has his new report out talking about, greedflation and how corporate America during the first year of the pandemic was responsible for all of the inflation that hurt workers. And I know that the comment has been, wages are keeping up and are surpassing inflation, but not after that first year. And this is why I think what you guys do and what other unions are doing to fight for better wages, hours, conditions are going to help get us to the point where maybe our standard of living can catch back up. But we still lost that massive year, that first year of where we've fallen behind as working people. I think the statistic that he used was inflation went up by 14%, but corporate profits went up by 75%. And the fact that in the private sector, only 6% of the workforce is unionized, the wealthy got to keep a good portion of it.
They did. Absolutely right. Everything you said is absolutely right. But what we also saw was worker dignity go down, right? So a lot of the strikes that we've seen in our union over the last year have been nurses, for example, nurses in California and Michigan who are fighting for patient ratios and workplace safety. That's also something that we saw, that our members saw during the pandemic, is it's just worker safety, dignity, and that's what we keep fighting for daily.
So, going forward, again, I keep coming back to this because I think it's important. I want to hammer this out. How are you getting the message out to your members and to others? Because look, I have a lot of my union brothers and sisters saying, well, they've bought the right-wing frames. Sleepy Joe, they're not doing anything. Inflation's all his fault. What are you doing to get out to the membership and to others to say, look, we need to hold on to the gains that we've made, and we've got somebody in the White House who's willing to listen. How are you pushing that out?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we're doing these political organizing trainings, and the only way that we're going to get any movement in our members, and especially those members that tend to vote the other way, is to have very uncomfortable one-on-one conversations. So we're actually training folks to become these political organizers, to go out to the work sites and have conversations with their coworkers, to have conversations with in their families and their communities. And these are going to be very, very uncomfortable conversations that people are not going to be excited about, but that's what it's going to take.
No, and I've said for a very long time that the only way we're going to reunite this country, the only way we're going to bring people back together is if we reunionize this country. If we get back to a union density rate, like where my grandparents' generation were in the heart of their working lives, 35%, and get people fighting on the right issues, fighting for better wages, hours, conditions, opportunities, fighting on the right stuff instead of the stuff that's divisive. I mean, you look at Occupy Wall Street, you look at, then you had the Tea Party movement, both the right and the left, they were saying almost the same stuff. Corporate America is screwing us. The tax code is rigged against us. Opportunity's not there. So for me, if we could bring all those people together and say, let's fight for better opportunities, wages, hours, conditions, all that stuff, maybe we can get rid of the fringe stuff.
Oh, 100%. I agree. And our members resoundingly in the survey loudly said the exact same thing. And we got the message, and that's why we endorsed President Biden for re-election.
Yeah, I mean, I've been saying for a very long time, it's not about red hat, blue hat. It's about hard hat. We got a lot of work to do in this country to get things back to somewhat near the sane line. But here's the problem, and this is where, I hear people say, well, unions are in the pocket of Democrats anyway, so this endorsement doesn't mean anything. I think it does. I think the fact that you're out there talking to your members and saying, hey, this is what this guy has done, this is why you support him. I think it's important because, look, the other side's got a lot of billionaires with deep pockets trying to say, no, you don't need those stinking unions anymore. And as my grandfather always said, if a rich guy's going to take a buck out of his pocket to tell you don't need something, you better spend $2 to get it, because he understands return on investment. So we better start spending $2 to keep what we got.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's why we jumped ahead as quickly as we could, and in preparation for a very busy year in 2024. You're going to see us all over the country mobilizing our members to become political organizers across the whole union.
No, we've got a lot to do coming up. What's your big issue going forward? I mean, obviously there's a lot on the table. Each union's got their thing. What's your big issue?
To continue to push the PRO Act is a big thing for us. A lot of, we're organizing a lot in tech, in nonprofit arenas, and we run into constant roadblocks in our organizing efforts. So to push for organizing opportunities for pro-worker, pro-labor policies is our biggest thing.
No, and again, I've been saying for a very long time that we've done the groundwork. We've done the organizing. We've got the energy of working people who are saying, look, we want unions. The approval ratings for unions are at an all-time high. You've got more people saying we want the benefits of what unions bring, wages, hours, conditions. We just don't have the legal framework that's going to cause an explosion. And I think we're right back in that 1930s kind of moment where people are in the streets. There's an energy. We just need some kind of legislative fix, like the National Labor Relations Act, the peace treaty of that era did. We need something today to update what are our labor laws, almost 100 years old? It's time to update those, I think.
Absolutely. And labor is the one to do it. I mean, we have the structure, we have the organizing skills, unlike the Occupy movement, which was a great catalyst, but we are the ones that can actually take it forward and build, use our organizing skills and our structure to continue that fight and actually win.
If people want to find out more about what you do and maybe how to join, how to become a member, how to organize their workplace with OPEIU, what do they do?
Yeah, go to our website, opeiu.org. Like I said, we're organizing anywhere from nonprofit to tech and university, college staff all across. Just give us a shout on our website.
Yeah, I was talking to a guy earlier today, and he goes, "They've got office workers unions?" And I'm like, yeah, we used to have a union for virtually every job in this country. And maybe someday we'll go back to it.
Yeah, exactly. And for those that have seen 9 to 5 with Dolly Parton, that's based on our members.
There you go. Cesar, I appreciate you taking some time for us. Good on you for the endorsement. I wish you the best. And I'd like to talk to you again some point down the road.
I look forward to it. Thank you, Rick.
Thanks so much. Again, make sure you check out the website, opeiu.org. We'll get links out on social media. You can take a look at that. Quick break. Right back with your thoughts. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For working people, come to talk.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
Good on the folks there at the OPEIU. Again, check out their website, opeiu.org. And look, you know, at this moment, I don't know that there will be a union that doesn't endorse Joe Biden. I don't know how you can't. Honestly, I don't know how, given the fact that everything that they have done legislatively, many of the executive orders have been labor focused. The appointments to the NLRB, the appointments to the Department of Labor. If you are a working person, this is a working person's president. And I know, but inflation, Rick, it's all Joe Biden's fault. The inflation. And I just told you, corporate America is robbing you blind. Yeah, inflation went up 14%. Corporate profits 75% in that first freaking year. And you go, what has one got to do with the other? They raised prices through the roof because they could, because they knew they had you. They knew there was nothing else you were going to be able to do. They knew there were a lot of imports that weren't coming in to create the competition that they were afraid of. Because look, we've allowed monopolies to spring up all over the place. And there's nobody to fight back on that. So as I'm spending my time, fighting back on the, Biden has done everything that I could have begged a president to do. The stuff that I've been talking about the last 18 years on this program, Biden's done many of them. I would love to see major comprehensive labor law reform, but you know how that happens? Not because of Joe Biden. Biden would be the guy to sign it, absolutely, but it has to come out of the House and the Senate. It's got to get past a 60-vote cloture vote. The interesting thing, there's a guy who busts my shoes all the time, politically all the time, about why Joe Biden is president and the Democrats have the Senate. How come they don't do anything? And I go, a little thing called cloture. And he had acted like I had a third head. What's that? And you go, the reason nothing gets done, the fact that it takes a supermajority in the Senate to get anything accomplished. If we want to get labor law reform, you need 60 votes in the Senate. And you need to stop one Republican from putting a hold on anything. And I say we have to eliminate the filibuster, go back to a talking filibuster, like Mr. Smith when he went to Washington in that movie years and years and years ago that I think most of us haven't seen and very few of us have heard of at this point. But if you want to filibuster something, get your comfortable shoes, get your material, and get out there on the floor and hold the floor. None of this lazy, I'm going to put a hold on. No. You want to filibuster? Start talking, buddy. And I think we should amend it to go, you don't get to just read the phone book. You don't get to just read an encyclopedia. You got to stay on topic. You've got to talk about what it is and why it is you're against whatever it is you're filibustering. And as long as you want, spend days talking. Bring a bucket, do your business, keep talking. And explain to us why. But they don't want to do that. Because the Senate is where good things go to die. We could have had the Employee Free Choice Act if not for Arlen Specter. We could have had comprehensive major labor law reform numerous times in this country, but Republicans have always stood in the way. And yet working people keep going, no, I'm going to vote for that guy. Because, he says the things I'm thinking. But here's the reality. The reality is there has been a massive redistribution of wealth in this country. from you and me and working people to the very wealthy. And they then turn around and they use that money against us constantly. And look, a moment ago I brought up the fact that you had the Tea Party movement, a right-wing movement in this country of angry white people, mostly men, middle-aged men, Gen X and older. And you had the left occupy Wall Street. A lot of young people who are saying, look, the economy isn't working for us. Who are saying, look, the tax code is rigged against us. Corporations have too much power. Both sides are saying the same stuff. Now, they have different solutions, but what was the wealth class able to do in both situations? Well, they co-opted the Tea Party movement. So, of course, they became an arm of the Republican Party, the attack arm. And they discredited the Occupy Wall Street, a bunch of dirty hippies with no agenda. And yet, no, they had a very clear agenda. Tax rich people. That was very clear. And I was saying this back during that time. It's a very clear agenda. Tax rich people. Go back to the good socialist President Dwight David Eisenhower's tax code. Very simple. Invest in education. Invest in infrastructure. Invest in the country. It was very clear. There was a bunch of anti-monopoly stuff. There was a bunch of corporate accountability stuff. And had we done any of those things, do you know what wouldn't have happened right after the pandemic? Corporate profits wouldn't have gone up 75% and caused massive inflation. Or as some have called it, greedflation. And yet we keep, Joe Biden's fault, Joe Biden's fault, FJB. And it's frightening how easy it is to divide and conquer. It's frightening how easy it is to pit working people against each other. I go back to the Jay Gould quote, I can pay half the working class to murder the other half. Yeah. And I remember when the Tea Party sprung up. I remember talking to a couple of labor leaders and saying, you guys should be sending your members to those meetings. You should be getting on the ground. You have the organizational capacity to go in and take that over. Because guess what? They're singing from your hymnal. They're singing your song, man. You wrote this stuff. Get in there and get involved with that. No, those are just a bunch of right-wing crackpots who listen to right-wing talk radio. Yeah. Who have co-opted your message and now want to spin it for their purposes. And look, the Republican Party has been trying to find a way to be the party of working people. And as I said the other day, if they lose their anti-union stance and they can court enough labor unions to go, no, we won't attack you anymore. We'll let you be. Just let us have our tax breaks and our deregulation and our corporate friendliness on this side. If that happens, Democrats are done. Which is why, again, I come back to Joe Biden and the things that he has done. In my lifetime, there has not been a president who's done as much as Biden has done to earn re-election. And I don't say that lightly. I think that this guy, for what, and again, I've been talking about a lot of this stuff for years. The want to have the ability, not the control, but the ability to go out and fight for those better wages, hours, conditions, the ability for people locally to have government out of their lives and to be able to take control locally of their workspace and to negotiate equally and fairly. That's all. I don't want the game rigged against employers, but the pendulum has swung way too far in their direction. It's time for working people to, get a fair shake. Just a thought. I want to hear yours. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Gonna take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1897. That was the day that Dorothy Day, a leader of the Catholic worker movement, was born in Brooklyn, New York. As a young girl, her family moved to San Francisco. Her father lost his job as a sports writer due to the devastating earthquake of 1906, and the family relocated again to Chicago. In 1932, she met Peter Morin, and together they founded the Catholic Worker Movement, a faith-based social justice effort. The Catholic workers opened what they called houses of hospitality to serve those in need. Dorothy helped to co-found The Catholic Worker, a monthly newspaper that became a voice for poor and working people. While writing for the paper, Dorothy traveled and visited with some of the most exploited workers in the country. She talked with migrant agricultural workers in California and was arrested for supporting the United Farm Workers in 1973. In 1940, she visited the Hooverville encampment in Seattle, Washington. Dorothy's reporting vividly demonstrated how her faith informed her activism. She wrote, quote, "The rain poured down. Underneath was mud, ankle deep, and the long lane that cut between the rows of shacks reflected the gray clouds in its pools. But Christ is there. I thought sadly, there in the mud, in the shacks with his poor, with them he is trying to find a place to lay his head. With them he hungers, and with them he suffers fatigue of body and soul. Behold, O God, our Redeemer, and look upon the face of thy Christ. There in the dumps, among the creatures who still are men. Have pity on them and on us, who permit such things to be." Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
If you're trying to enact an extremist right-wing policy, but the public keeps rejecting it, what do? You could try blatant deception, giving the same old policy a new coat of paint, a euphemistic name, and a multi-million-dollar political shove. That's the dark path now being taken by the clique of plutocrats and theocrats who are determined to privatize America's public schools. Take Texas Governor Greg Abbott. Please. Joking aside, he's been pushing to make taxpayers fund private schools. But his own right-wing legislature has consistently rejected his power play. After all, even red state Republicans don't want for-profit chains and religious zealots grabbing tax dollars to indoctrinate school children. So this year, Abbott and company rebranded their scheme as, quote, school choice and parental empowerment. Who could be against that? The people, it turns out. While some families might want exclusive private schools, their claim that they have no choice is a fraud. As one GOP legislator put it, his rural county has, quote, private schools, a parochial school, a charter school, and a large homeschool community. That is choice, he rightly notes. Who are the privatizers? National billionaires like the Koch brothers. And in Texas, we have Tim Dunn and Ferris Wilks, two messianic oil billionaires from West Texas who double as proselytizers of a toxic theology of Christian nationalism. They are the money gods of school privatization. Indeed, the governor, more than half of Texas House members, and every Republican state senator are financially hooked on their oil money. This is Jim Hightower saying, no matter what slogan the privatizers masquerade behind, their goal is simply to defund public schools and divert our education dollars from the common good to their corporate and theological academy. Ask yourself, what would Jesus do?
Welcome. Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So yesterday came across a House bill here in Pennsylvania, passed House Bill 612, and I saw, it's going to provide some funding for Penn State University, some funding for the University of Pittsburgh, some funding for Temple University, 7% increase for them, and also 25% increase for Lincoln University. And I'm going, well, what about the rest of the PASHE schools? I know that their faculty and the coaches, I know that they're negotiating a new contract. I know all that's going on. So I figured, hey, let's reach out to our good friend Ken Mash and find out exactly what's going on, get the skinny on how things are going there. That's why I've asked Ken to come talk with us. Ken is the president of the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, apscuff.org, their website. Ken, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you, Rick. It's a pleasure to be here.
So last time we talked, you guys were in contract negotiations with the PASHE schools, the Pennsylvania Association of State System Higher Education folks. How are things going there? Let's start with that.
Well, we're still in negotiations both for our faculty and we have a separate contract for our coaches. We've been negotiating now for over a year. Our contract expired last June. I think we've made some progress at the table, but there's still a number of really very important issues that we have to deal with, issues that we consider to be important for both the future of the state system, for quality education, and we look forward to moving on that and getting it done sooner rather than later.
Yeah, how long does this take? I mean, you said you've been doing this over a year now. That you would think that this would be something that you can move in the right direction on, get this done. What's the holdup? What is it? Is it money? Is it the power? What is it?
All of the above. So it's it's a little bit of everything, but our faculty contract covers many different aspects of faculty life, tenure, promotion, sabbaticals. Long list of things, including the various different types of faculty that there are, library faculty, counselors, our licensed psychologists. So it's a complex contract. Yeah. So it does require that we go through many different items. So it's not simply a matter of talking about salary and benefits, but of course, salary and benefits are important. Then if you take into the fact that the state system consolidated its universities from 14 down to 10, we were confronted with a number of issues that are particular to those universities that were impacted. So we have to deal with those things in order to be able to move forward. So it's been slow, but eventually we need to see some progress.
I mean, on your side of this, I mean, the reality is seems to be an assault on higher education all across this country as we're moving more away from traditional brick and mortar schools to, these for-profit online schools that seem to be popping up. In fact, Donald Trump's great idea was he was going to do, I forget what he was going to call it, maybe another Trump university, but he was going to have free online college for everyone, which, good luck with that. But it seems like there's a push towards all of this quickie stuff and away from what was traditional education.
Yeah. And so it seems that, we've been facing this now for, 2 decades at least, probably more, where there's been this attack on higher education, and it's really come to the forefront in the last year. But, it really starts with underfunding the public universities, making it more difficult for students to be able to afford to go, because if you're not going to pay the bills with state funding, you're going to pay it with tuition dollars. And the first instinct was to increase tuition because there were a lot of students at the time. But as the number of high school graduates dropped, then students were faced with choices. And you can't bleed a stone. And we've got all these problems with student loan debt and everything that it has stem from that. And so what we see happening is we've seen greater and greater intrusion into the business of our universities for political purposes. And I would even argue that there is a fundamental political purpose served by denying access to higher education and making sure that there's always people willing to do lesser jobs and not look at their future. So we've had a lot of bad mouthing of higher education, which isn't really even accurate, because every study shows that over the course of your lifetime, you're going to be much better off with a degree than you are without a degree. But we keep on hearing it sold over and over again that there's plenty of jobs out there. You can make a fortune, just right out of high school with some training. And it just isn't completely accurate. Now, I don't want to bash those jobs. They're important jobs. and they're well-paying jobs, and there are people for whom that's the right thing to do. But even for those people, when you say, hey, you can get out of high school and be making $70,000 a year, that's true. But 10 years from now, you're going to be making $70,000 plus whatever cost of living adjustment it is. It's not like you're going to be upwardly mobile because you've taken those positions. So even if you take one of those positions, you want to add on some degree that enables you to expand your horizons.
Yeah.
But we have been seeing politics make its way into higher education.
No, what's interesting to me is, we've got people who are selling education as a product that's going to get you a job, where, I always believed that, continuing your education was for self-enrichment first, make you a good, well-rounded, thoughtful person, a critical thinker that maybe can engage in our political world, but also to help, get those jobs and to be better at what you do. But we've been selling education a lot like products, that you'd buy off the shelf, I think.
Yeah, so those things I don't see them as mutually exclusive, as you sort of indicated, right? It's good for you, for your career, but it's absolutely true that you expand your horizons and you can be a better citizen, you could be better prepared to be a parent. Every function in society, you're better off with more knowledge. And that, you're right, that does get sold short. And I think the root of that is, in part, again, it goes to making higher education more expensive and trying to attract students. So we increasingly treat students like any other consumer, right? Give them what they want rather than educate them, tell them what they need. And so, we see all these gimmicks coming into the fore. You can get your there's been talk now of cutting down a college degree from 120 credits to 90 credits. Well, something's going to get lost there. You're not getting the same deal. You're getting a little White Castle hamburger instead of a Big Mac if you're buying into that. It's just the reality of things. Or the fad was, pre-pandemic, online. Now we come to see that students actually often prefer to be face-to-face and not just simply online, and that online education doesn't work for every student. But there's always kind of, and I think a lot of this is forced by the money issue, looking for gimmicks rather than looking to solve the fundamental problems.
No, and the reason that I bring this up is because that's what you're competing with. I know a bunch of people who are going to the for-profit online schools because they think, hey, I can do this in my time, and I'll get it done quicker, and it'll end up being cheaper. And the reality is, even if they do finish, and the vast majority do not, most people don't recognize those as real degrees, which is really kind of interesting that people keep doing it. But that's what you're competing against. You're competing against that world.
Yeah, we're competing against that. We're competing against, like I said, you've got your ironically, these multi-billionaires arguing too, hey, I didn't go to college, as if they're they're the example that everybody's going to follow and be successful. We need some heavy dose of honesty in this area as well as many other areas.
I'm right there with you. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show. We're with Ken Mash. He's the president of the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, apscuf.org, their website, if you want to take a look at the work that they do. Now, I want to go back to this legislation that passed out of the House, and I understand it's dead in the Republican Senate, not going to go anywhere, but the idea of 7% increase in funding for Penn State, University of Pitt, Temple, and a 25% increase for Lincoln University, and freezing the tuition at those universities for the 24-25 year. What did the state system schools get? The other ones, the ones that I didn't name.
Yeah, so the state system universities, the state-owned universities, received already a 6% increase in its budget, plus some additional money to help pay off some legacy debt that was owed, and really came to the fore after the consolidation that occurred. In looking at that 7%, yeah, that number is more, but it doesn't take into account some extra funding that we had gotten in our budget last year. So the extra money actually makes up a little bit for money that was one-time money last time. I know it gets complicated and it's not the most exciting thing, but the 7% is not a true 7% increase. From our perspective, Pennsylvania is actually blessed by the number of universities that it has, and the number of community colleges it has, and even our private universities that serve their function. And what we need is a healthy higher ed environment all around. So, we need to fund our state-related universities. We need to fund our universities. We need to fund the community colleges, because what the future holds for us is there's going to be a need for people who have education in the future for good jobs. And all the studies that are out there show that we are not on a path to having enough people with high quality education in order to be able to be attractive to employers to come here. So we need to fix this problem, and we need to stop playing games. We need to fully fund, all of our public universities, and we need to do the right thing for the students of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, now I understand there's a scholarship program, this Pennsylvania Promise. It's a pilot program. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so we've been working on this for like 10 years, it seems like now. There's a lot of states that have these Promise programs, which pay for the first 2 years of college, and that's what this would do. It would pay for the first 2 years of community college. It would pay for the first 2 years at a state system school. And if you went to a state-related school, you'd be eligible for the money that you would have gotten had you gone to a state system school. And really what we're trying to do is conquer the affordability problem. And it also has some extra money in it for students whose family income is below $60,000 to help them with, living expenses and books as well. And, it's being reintroduced. It had been introduced before. Senator Hughes is about to introduce it. He sent around a memo. Representative Jordan Harris, is a sponsor of it in the House. And we're really looking for it to move this year, at least in the House, to get some action on it, because it really truly is what parents and students deserve in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I've been saying for the longest time, probably 10 years or more now, that we're at a point, I think, in the development of our society, that 12 years just isn't enough schooling, that we should be moving to 14. That should be a public education, and it should be able to go to a community college or to a state system school or something like that. That's part of your every student's base education. That we've now moved beyond much like in the old days when my grandparents' generation were children. An 8th grade education was enough. Then they said, no, you need to go to high school and you need to get a diploma. And we moved beyond. I think we're to the point now where a high school diploma is not enough. You need to go on and get 2 more years of community college, trade school, but something that doesn't saddle a student with a lifetime of debt just because they said, hey, I want to be able to do better.
Yeah, it's the debt issue that's really at the forefront, right? That our students are graduating. They're graduating with this tremendous amount of debt. They come out of college and they can't, even if they get a good job, they can't afford to own their own house. They can't afford to get married. They can't afford to buy a car. All those things get delayed. And you think about the harm that is caused to Pennsylvania's economy, right? Because people are not buying houses. They're not buying cars. They're not getting married and starting families. It really, I think there's just this initial gut reaction to go, hey, that's going to cost a lot of money, without asking, well, what is the cost right now? What are we losing right now by not funding this? And isn't this, instead of looking at it as an expense, we really truly have to start looking at these things as investments in the future.
I am right there with you. And I've been saying this for the longest time. I hope somebody in a position of power goes, hey, this is what we need to do, and maybe start moving in that direction. But I do want to get back to your negotiations real quick before I let you go. I know a couple of years ago you guys went on strike. It was a longer than I thought it was going to be strike. Is there a possibility of that happening here in the near future?
Well, strikes are one tool at a union's disposal, and we would certainly never rule that out. Our commitment to our members is to go to the negotiations table and keep on negotiating as long as we think that we are making progress. We're not going to rush. We're not going to take a bad deal just to get it done. But ultimately, there are good reasons often to go on strike, to exert your power, to match the power that employers have.
Because we've been seeing a number of strikes here lately, and not that it's something that you jump into. And as I say, I tell people repeatedly, the strike is the last arrow in the quiver. Sometimes it's the last option, and no one rushes into it, but it's got to be there.
Absolutely, and we would never take it off the table.
There you go, Ken. I appreciate the time. Wish you guys the best of luck. I know it's been a long journey, but I know you'll get there. Appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot, Rick. I appreciate it.
Our good friend Ken Mash. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people on the talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1892. That was the day that black and white workers in New Orleans began what is considered the first integrated general strike in United States history. The strike began when the New Orleans Board of Trade refused to enter into an agreement with the Teamsters Union because it included black members. The Teamsters were part of what was known as the Triple Alliance. The other two groups in the alliance were the Scalesmen and the Packers Unions. The Board of Trade had settled contracts with those two, mostly white unions. The refusal to bargain with the Teamsters set a wave of anger through the New Orleans labor movement. Labor was on the march in New Orleans in 1892. That May, streetcar workers had won union recognition after a successful strike. The American Federation of Labor had spent the year organizing throughout the city. One emphasis of the organizing drive was interracial labor cooperation. Workers were ready to let their voices be heard. The general strike was called and grew to include between 20 and 25,000 workers. Trade unions, musicians, and shoe clerks joined the strike. Even some of the unions that had already won contracts, including the streetcar workers, walked off the job in solidarity. The central demand was union recognition. The mayor of New Orleans refused to deploy his police force to stop the strikers, but the governor threatened armed intervention. Faced with that threat, the strike ended on November 11th. The workers gained some wage increases, but did not win union recognition. And in retribution for their solidarity, the streetcar workers lost the contract they had won earlier that year. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. So I got an email from a listener who said, hey, I want to get a shout out to IBEW Local 210 in Atlantic City. They are on strike right now, and the workers at the Jersey Shore Utility are on strike. They went on strike, I guess it was on Sunday. They've been out on the picket line for a couple of days. Almost 400 employees are out on that picket line, so I wanted to throw a quick shout out to them and best to them. We're going to reach out and see if we can get somebody to come on the program and talk about what's going on there. But look, you were seeing a lot of activity. We're seeing a lot of people who were saying, hey, you know what? We demand better. And look, I was just having this conversation earlier today when I first brought up the whole greedflation thing and in the KC report that pointed out, inflation went up 14%. Yeah, but corporate profits went up 75% that first year. They are robbing us blind. And the thing that I keep trying to get across to friends, and this was the conversation I had, and the reason for strong union density is most union contracts have a COLA in them, a cost of living adjustment. So when inflation goes up above a certain point, wages automatically tick up with that, and it's in the contractual language. And I've said this before. My grandfather 1 year got like 3 raises in a year, back during the 70s as inflation was rampant. The wages kept up, so their standard of living did not go down. Their wages went up, and then their wages went up so much because the inflation had gone up so much that, in the 60s when they bought their house and it was a struggle to make the mortgage payment, by the end of the 70s, in a decade, it was a day's pay. I mean, stop and think about that for a minute. Because the union contract had added in there, look, as prices go up, as inflation goes up, wages have to go up so that our members don't get cheated. And this acted as a stabilizer. This is one of those things where corporations were like, look, if we raised all the prices up, wages are going to go up. So is the balancing act worth it? And it wasn't just in a handful of places. Remember, 35% of the people in this country were unionized back in the late 60s. And that meant when the 35% of the workforce who had union contracts, something happened to them, the 35% of the workers doing similar jobs who didn't have contracts got kind of the same stuff because that's how it worked. And, I was saying this the other day because, someone had mentioned to me that, the UAW is going to go out and they're going to organize, Honda and Toyota and Volkswagen and all of them. They're going to go out and organize them. And I'm like, that's fabulous. That's what you want. You want to take wages and working conditions and benefits out of the equation. You want everybody in the same world so that you compete on the right things, quality, service, who makes the best mousetrap, who has the best paint job, whatever. But you want it to be on things that aren't working people slitting each other's throats for pennies, and who's willing to tighten the belt so tight that they end up starving themselves. And this is what a strong union movement does for a country. And I would argue in this moment after the pandemic, had we 35% union density, I guarantee you wouldn't have seen 75% corporate profits, because those workers would have said, hey, over here, we'll take some of that because our prices are going up. Our costs are going up. Our standard of living is costing more. And we should want that. And you go, well, I'm not going to be in a union. Here's the weird thing. And I remember when I was doing some work with the negotiating committee on our contract years ago. And I remember having a supervisor ask me, hey, how are things going? And I said, well, just a basic, things are going. He goes, get as much as you can. And I'm like, why? He goes, because we know, and what we've learned is that when you do well, we do well. They didn't have a union, but in order to keep them happy, they had to get the same kind of raises. So if the union workers did well, the non-union management workers did well too. And this is something that never gets talked about. So the idea that we have a strong labor movement that says, look, corporate America, fine, go ahead, raise the prices, but we're taking some of it because we're not going to fall behind. And this is a mentality that working people in this country have to come back around to, that we need to be taking on corporate America. We need to be taking on the profiteers. And look, I love the KC report. I'm hoping that they'll actually do something with it. I'm hoping they'll actually go after the greedflaters. I'm hoping they actually go after these people who screwed us in a national moment of crisis. And I would love to see them not just slap them with some fines and some of that, but shame them publicly, bring them out into public and say, look, these are the people who made your lives more difficult when they didn't have to. And they did it because, well, they could. That's my thought. Want to hear yours. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind. rick@thericksmithshow.com. Miss any portion of the program? Download the podcast. You'll get that at the ricksmithshow.com as well.
Listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show.